Hello everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. And we catch up with Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also email me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. So this week we are going to be having a catch-up show. So we're going to be catching up with two of our previous guests. These are both writers. We have Charles Heathcote, author of the R. Doris series, and we have poet and fantasy novelist Michael-Israel Jarvis. Before that, we're going to head over to the Rhylight Zone, and Charles Heathcote, has been kind enough to allow us to share some of his poetry. So over to Charlie.
This next poem is also about Longclough and is about something that regularly happened when we visited when I was younger. As you will have heard, we had mention of the swamp. It was not a swamp, it was just a very muddy, boggy bit of Longclough, which we had to cross to actually get into the ship and to get to the yard, to get to the farmhouse. This was just something that happened often. It's called Marooned. They've tarmacked the drive where we once squelched through mud that wrapped around our knees, held tight as we struggled to lift our feet. Wellington booted, weighed down, waiting for Dad to heft us out, ferry us to a shore of stone. He saved the youngest first. I, the eldest, stuck fast, concreted in almost. Toes fixed, twitched as a chill wind taunted me, whispered down my neck that I would never be free. Meanwhile, Dad ambled to save us, one by one, tested the elastic of time. When my turn arrived, he heaved, hands dug beneath my armpits, but the mud held firm. I was bogged. Dad dragged me upwards. My feet birthed from my wellies and I clung tight like a shipwrecked passenger to a wardrobe door. The chill wind bit my ankles, threatened next time. I wonder if they salvaged my wellies before laying the drive, or if firm rubber stands immured beneath the tarmac. This next one that I'm going to read is the title poem, Shepherd's Delight. What happens in this poem is partly truthful, so I'll read it and then I will tell you how the actual story ends. He's barely 17, got a new licence in his pocket, sweaty palms on the steering wheel of the clapped-out Land Rover he's borrowed from his father. There's a stink of haylage and wet dog that he's tried to cover up with Link's dark temptation, but he swears the stench still lingers. And he wonders what she's thinking in the passenger seat, dressed for a trip to the cinema. Instead, they're at the top of Blaze Hill, stargazing, waiting for the sun to rise. She makes the first move, unfurls his hands, teaches him to steer. Everything there did happen. But my dad used to rent some land in Reno, and there was a Land Rover one night parked in his field that should not have been there. And my dad's landlord lived in the farmhouse across from this field, saw them, and decided that it might be sheep rustlers. It was somebody who shouldn't be there. He did not recognise the Land Rover. So he decided that he was going to sneak up on this Land Rover. And he did. And he discovered a young courting couple who were thought that nobody would pay attention to the fact that they were in this field, that they would be able to get amorous without anybody paying them any mind at all. Well, my dad's landlord went and ruined the mood, and I'm pretty sure that that young lad will have been traumatised. The next poem is one that I wrote quite early on into the writing of this collection, and is a memory that has stuck in my mind for decades now, which is when my two older brothers were both determined that they'd be able to shoot and prepare a rabbit for eating. But this is what it means to be a man. Dad skins 2 rabbits in the kitchen sink, tears their bodies with his bare hands, livers squashed between thumb and forefinger, the heart left to spin down the plug hole. Bones crack and squelch, seep against stainless steel, simmer in the sunlight. He fries the rabbits in butter, feeds them to our Mark, whose teeth snag on hair and fur, and I laugh because he can't stomach the job. Can't hold himself with the resigned determination of a man all steely-eyed and clenched jaw. I'd have eaten the head first, proved to Dad I am capable. I am not the tears in the playground and the fear of the dark, can take the threat of a bout without an asthma attack. But fathers make mice of mountains of men, pounce like cats beneath cupboards, unearthing secrets, can wrench apart their son's ribcage with a look. And I think that that's another thing that this collection does a lot. I think I ended up using the poetry to examine different relationships that I had with family members. So like the relationship between myself and my dad, and trying to gain a different understanding of it through poetry, which sounds a lot more pretentious than I meant it to. And in 2018, my grandmother died, my dad's mum. And I think that a few of the poems in here were also looking at that relationship, because we didn't really have this close relationship at all. And I can remember doing a video entitled Grief back when this first happened, and how we'd never really been close, and it was just because she was a woman who didn't really make known her feelings. And after she died, I found that she'd saved a piece of paper that was a Christmas card I'd written her when I was 4 years old. Terrible handwriting and everything. And I thought, well, maybe she did have more of an emotional connection to me than I previously thought.
That was some poetry by author Charles Heathcote from his collection Shepherd's Delight. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Vicky Roy with Adrift.
Secret places in my head, the words I wanted to write for you, and every tune I wish I knew. And the time we lose to sleep, the songs, melodies to make us weep, strange chords come at night to haunt you. Clouds blow past, become the shape of you. And where are you? Nowhere to be found. And I adrift and run aground. And the lies, the promises we made, the echoes we relayed, was changing in the tides. Where are you? Nowhere to be found. And I adrift and run aground. And who are you? Did I let you down? And when you ran, never made a sound. that you caught my eye. They called time and I said goodbye. Left us right there up in the distance, surrounded by the walls that I made just to keep me safe. But you walked right through my barricades. Call me up in the middle of the night, 'cause you can't wait till the morning light. You told me everything would be alright. You told me not to worry, no, not to worry. Be my peace, come be my savior, come be my world, my world. Oceans part won't stop us. Days turn to night and we're helpless. Go in the shadow. Holding the space between my fingers. I'll never leave. I'm all in. Yeah, now I'm falling over and over again. I'm closer. I made a promise that I would never cross that line, but I'm so far into you. Teach me how to really let you see me. I've been hurt, but I know that I'm not alone, 'cause you lit the light in my heart of stone. Call me up in the middle of the night, 'cause I can't wait till the morning light. You told me everything would be alright. You told me not to worry, no, not to worry. Be my peace, come be my savior, come be my world, my world. Oceans apart won't stop us. Days turn to night and we're helpless. Go in the shadow. Holding the space between my fingers. I'll never leave. I'm all in. Yeah, now I'm falling, falling. I could wait forever, forever. I'll never know, we could be together, together. No, no. Oceans apart won't stop us. Days turn to night and we're helpless. Go in the shadow. Holding the space between my fingers. I'll never leave. I'm all in. Oh, now I'm falling, falling, falling.
That was All In by Steph Willis, and before that we had Adrift by Vicky Roy. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to have the first of our catch-ups for this week. So this is us catching up to see what's new with author Charles Heathcote. The question to begin with is pretty much, what have you been up to since last time we spoke? And I know you've been keeping very busy.
Yes, although quite honestly, I can't remember how long it's been since last we spoke.
Neither can I. So it was probably, I think it was probably about 3 or 4 years now.
Right, so if it was 4 years, then we've released another 3 books since then. So we finished the Doris series now, that was with Royally Doris, and released a poetry collection, Shepherd's Delight, and just finished the second in the Cozy Crime series. So yes, that's probably it. It's those 3 books, yeah.
Awesome. And so do you want to tell us a little bit about each of those books? I mean, I guess you could start with the Doris series as a whole, maybe. And well, if both the series, I guess if you give us an idea of what the series are about.
So with the Our Doris series, we're following the septuagenarian housewife, Mrs. Doris Copeland, and her hijinks throughout the town of Partridge Mews. In the first book, she's trying to gain a place in her local garden safari. The second book, she's trying to become chairwoman of the WI. Third book, she's on a cruise ship. And the fourth book is, well, she's fighting against local planning as somebody tries to rebuild on some greenbelt land. She's dealing with grief and that sort of thing in the final book. And the other is a cozy crime series following Alice Valentine and Marmaduke Featherstone, two people who are probably a little bit acerbic, a little bit mean as they go around trying to solve the murder of a former detective.
Cool.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, so I mean, presumably with Doris, do you ever plan to revisit Doris, or is that it for the Doris series?
I don't know because the Cozy Crime series is set in the same world as Doris, so there's always the possibility there of crossover. But when I'd finished with Royally Doris, it did feel like a definitive end,
Hmm.
and I felt like her story was done. So there's the possibility there, but at the moment, it does feel like it's completely done. There's nothing forthcoming with Doris and Harold again.
Yeah. Whereas I guess with the mystery series, is that have you kind of envisioned an end for that, or is that just going to be ongoing with
I've
mystery after mystery?
envisaged, sorry, I've envisaged an end for the first arc of the book. So there's going to be 5 books that deal with an overarching story revolving around the disappearance of one of the protagonist's family members. But whilst I've got mysteries planned after that, there is an end at the 5th book. So that's to allow myself some time to go off and explore other things as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like your poetry collection. So can you tell us a little bit about that and I guess how that's influenced by your upbringing as well?
Yeah, so the poetry collection came about in a weird way in that I didn't plan on writing a poetry collection. And then a friend of mine who was the former Cheshire Poet Laureate um, got me writing poetry. And then I kept writing stuff that was to do with my family and farming. And as you've just said, it was to do with my upbringing. I am the son of a farmer, but I chose not to go down that route, whereas my other siblings did.
Hmm.
And I ended up writing about my experiences and the stories that had gone on throughout my family and our history and that sort of thing. And they always came out more in poetry. And eventually, people kept asking me when a collection was coming out. And eventually, I just had enough poems. And I thought, well, I'll do this collection. And I never knew when it was going to end.
Yeah.
And then ended up writing a different poem. I was like, oh, so we're done with those poems now. And then I started a second collection. So it just seems to have become this thing of exploring a different medium. And it was a good way of almost writing a memoir through poems, really. I didn't, I've not got enough to write an entire memoir, but apparently I've got enough for a collection of poetry.
Yeah. That makes sense. Cool. And are you still doing the local writers groups that you take part in?
Yeah, so that was another reason behind the poetry, actually.
Hmm.
So we have the Macclesfield Creative Writing Group, which I am the secretary of and have been since 2011. But alongside that, our founder started a monthly event called Poems and Pints at the Button Warehouse. And I was having to write poetry every month for that. And now I've become co-host of that as well. So I'm regularly in attendance there. So I guess that kind of led to the progression with the poetry of doing these events through town.
Yeah. Cool. And what have you been up to on your YouTube/BookTube channel of late?
So I took a break last year and then came back, and now I try to do weekly reviews, and then there's a weekly review and a weekly vlog, and then we have a Friday video in which it can be anything from me chatting about the different collections of books I've got on my shelves, or just chatting nonsense about nothing in particular. Uh, we seem to have veered away from the wool gathering videos for a while, where I did just ramble and try to focus more on discussing books and discussing various facets of literature and that sort of thing. But yeah, this year I'm trying to put out 3 videos a week. We've
Awesome.
had we've had some popular videos and we've had some that haven't done so well.
Yeah. And I like to ask this question in general. So what have you been reading lately? What books have you been reading?
So currently I am reading a few fantastical novels. So I'm currently reading the Forever Sea by Joshua Philip Johnson. And then I read Way of the Argosy by Sebastian de Castell last week. But it's also been a lot about the backlist books, and I'm trying to read all of the books on my shelves this year. So I haven't been buying anything new. So it's whatever I've got on there. So it can be Elizabeth Taylor, it can be Larry McMurtry. If it's on my shelf unread, then it's getting read this year.
And how have you avoided the temptation to buy new books, given that, you still work at the charity shop, right?
I still work at the charity shop, and luckily I have managed to gain some sort of willpower there to stop myself from doing it. But I have also got a shelf at work dedicated to the books that I would buy if I was buying books. So there are some books in the back of that shop that once I'm able to buy books again will be coming home.
Very nice. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. And just to wrap things up, really, so what have you got planned next? I guess specifically in terms of your writing and publishing, what have we got to look forward to? Especially, I like to kind of position this as if we were to catch up again in, say, another 3 to 4 years, what will you have out by then?
Okay, so the next 2 books that I think are going to be out, the next one's probably going to be the second cozy crime novel, Mistakes Mean Murder. The poetry collection, the second poetry collection as well, which is currently entitled Spring Fever. And then my main focus is to try and get the rest of the books in this first arc of the Cozy Crime series done, because it's been nearly 5 years since the first one, and people don't like to wait that long for a book. So the focus is going to be primarily on getting that series finished. So yeah, it will be the remainder of the books there. So yeah.
And this second poetry collection, is there a theme for that you can tell us about?
Spring, and weirdly a lot of romance. Also, there are a lot of character pieces in there, and a lot of the humor that has been throughout the Doris books has also come into this collection of poetry that wasn't really present in the first one.
Big thank you to Charles Heathcote for joining us for a little catch-up. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wycombe Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Nick Byrne with Houses.
Hey old man, where did your father go? Just let him go. He was baptized by fire, now he's just waiting for the snow. Hanging on to what he's got, trying to take it slow. I know you have time, don't you pass it up. Balancing on wires, for the sun to come on. There were lights in those houses, now they're boarded up. A warm retreat for a family, now they're just crumbling down. Listen, what stories would they keep? What is life if you don't continue to grow? Self-medication and build your comfort zone. I know you have time, don't you pass it up. Balancing on wires, waiting for the sun to come on. There were lights in those houses, now they're boarded up. falling down to dust. Whoa, whoa. I can't make it on my own. One day we'll find the pieces that make us whole. Our roots run deep once we've grown. Soon enough we'll call this house a home. This feels like home, feels like home, feels like home. Whoa, feels like home, feels like home. Oh, this feels like home, feels like home, feels like home. Whoa, feels like home, feels like home.
That was Houses by Nick Byrne. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. And it's time for us now to catch up with previous guest, Michael-Israel Jarvis. I can't remember when we last chatted, but it was a while ago. It was at least like 2 or 3 years ago, I think. So tell me what's new in your writing life and life in general since, COVID, I guess.
Yeah, it must have been 2 or 3 years. I was at a completely different house at that point.
Yeah.
What's new in my writing life? Let's think. I've been stalled somewhat in doing some editing for a novel that is sort of mostly finished, but in that stage. But mostly over the last year, I've been writing new poems and getting to performances in my city in Norwich, which has been really good. I've been enjoying that and taking part in the community of other people writing and performing poetry is very exciting. So that's kind of where I've been mostly.
Cool. Who are some of the other writers that are sort of in and around the Norwich scene?
Yeah, well, there's Rowan Anderson is one of my friends who I immediately think of first. Does very sweet poetry, very surprisingly profound poetry, where it starts out with quite natural imagery, and then it's kind of a deep dive into emotional relationship experiences. I'd say his work's worth checking out. A lot more rhyme use than I tend to use, but one of the joys of being in a scene with lots of other people is how varied the styles are. Tayside is superb, one of the best poets in Norwich, in my opinion. I think she is Tayside on Instagram, something like that. I can't quite remember social media stuff off the top of my head, but she just has this kind of stream of consciousness, moves between poems too quick for audiences to even really adjust sometimes in a way that is entrancing. Kind of end up feeling like there's almost an adrenaline kick from watching one of her sets. Casey Garfield, who I think might be leaving Norwich soon, which will be a loss for the scene, but some of the funniest, like for poetry that's not like necessarily set out to be comedy, just in its insight, it's very, very funny. It often deals with quite difficult subjects in ways that are very funny. There's a lot of other people I could mention.
Cool, awesome. And I know you've been I don't know, would you class yourself as an activist? Because I know that you're very you're certainly I would say not shy with your political views, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and talk about some of the causes that are most important to you.
Yeah, I could try. See what I can say without getting myself in trouble. What were you interested in particular?
A bit of everything, really. I mean, I know, for example, the current thing is with these protests going on, and so I wouldn't maybe. What are your views on that? It's
sort of been coming for a long time. I think the media landscape in the country, and the decades of deepening austerity have contributed to this climate where people are being encouraged to blame their deprivation on outsiders. This has always been the method for literally centuries. So you've got this growing base of frustrated people who don't kind of really know better. Perhaps they should, but and are blaming things on immigrants or Muslims or anybody that's in an outside group. Trans people as well get targeted in these culture wars. And yeah, we're seeing that flare into actual violence across the United Kingdom at the moment. Not so much in Norwich, thankfully. We're keeping a close eye and doing what we can locally as people in the community. Not that I'm doing much in that regard. There's a lot of people who are far more useful and important in that work. But yeah, it's a kind of grim inevitability, in my opinion, of the state of politics in this country. And I could get very boring and go on about that at length, but I won't. I think there's no answer in the main political parties to it. There's too much timidity. I can see Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has obviously avoided using accurate language to describe what has been a mixture of racism and actual kind of terror attacks, to avoid possibly inflaming things. But I feel like at this point it's a bit late to try and be diplomatic about people who are actually attacking their neighbours.
Well, and just to get political myself on that, but I mean, one of the things I've been thinking as well is it seems to me as though, because I would compare it not like in a direct way, but it's interesting to see the difference between the way that, you know, rioters and protesters at the moment, I don't think it's even accurate to call them protesters, but the way that they've been treated versus say Just Stop Oil, because literally it seems as though people are very quick to call Just Stop Oil protesters like eco-terrorists, for example. So it just seems weird that on the one side we kind of quick to use that kind of language, and on the other side maybe not. So I wondered kind of both your take on that, but also a bit more broadly, your take on how important the language we use is for, you know, real world issues like this.
On the Just Stop Oil point, that's I'm fairly sure I've got friends who are kind of I'm linked by, like, I don't know, a distance of maybe one or two people to at least one person who was charged and I think put away for nearly 5 years, compared to I think the couple of 2 to 3 year sentences that some of the rioters are now seeing, which does seem disproportionate. It does seem like the two things are very different. I think even if you take the position that what Just Stop Oil are doing, their disruptions is hugely negative, the intention is very different, and where they're coming from, I think, believing deeply that you're trying to prevent the worsening collapse of the climate and you're trying to save people feels like a very different place to be coming from than hating a particular subset of people for whatever reason. The language matters a great deal. I think it's used to frame who gets to be acceptable, who gets to be kind of politically valid. I think calling people trying to set fire to mosques or immigration lawyer officers or whatever it is, calling them protesters is an inherent validation of what they're doing, because protest is a right. Protest is something that we do as part of our kind of civic practice, as part of our engagement with our democracy. So it feels like exactly the wrong term. If you're trying to terrify people into leaving the country or feeling unwelcome, in my opinion, that's crossing a line into terrorism. Some of the rhetoric has been what I would use the term stochastic terrorism, trying to incite more acts of violence against individuals and against groups of people. I agree with you. I think protester is very wrong in that situation. Direct harm is not something you should be looking for in the practice of protest.
Cool. Well, to avoid getting too sad and depressing, I suppose, so we'll go back onto the subject of writing and poetry. But I mean, are the two linked, would you say? Like, when especially your writing, is that a reflection of the world we live in? You know, it's even when it comes to say some of the fantasy that you've done and some of the, I mean, I read Gravedigger, what was it, like 10 years or so ago now? Was that a reflection of the
Yeah,
world we lived in then? And, is the writing you're doing now a reflection of the world we live in now?
yeah, that's an interesting question. I think always to a certain extent. I think less so back then. But like Gravedigger was more about me wanting to play with ideas around good and evil in perception.
Mm-hmm.
You could link that to politics. You could link that to how different groups of people are perceived versus others. But it's a little bit of a
Even
stretch.
I think actually, because I think even with Gravedigger, a bit of it is about, finding identity and things like that as well. With somebody who's not a traditional, Conan the Barbarian type of hero, somebody kind of stepping into that role who maybe doesn't fit the mold as well.
Yeah, I think to an extent that's why. I mean, it's a classic trope as well. The kind of slightly unfit for purpose, at least at the beginning of the story, kind of hero. I think that kind of trope in fantasy kind of plays quite well for that reason. Is that a lot of us, especially those of us maybe who grew up reading fantasy, often find ourselves seeking community, seeking identity. But to return to kind of the original question, I'd say increasingly, more recently, especially as I've got to grips with my own identity, both issues of politics and identity have come through in what I'm writing a lot more. In poetry in particular, I've not been able to avoid engaging with, not that I should avoid engaging, but it's happened that I've written poetry that's regarding the situation with the genocide in Palestine, and I've always written the occasional depressing poem about the state of austerity and the way that marginalized and poorer people are affected under that kind of system. It's coming through more and more. I feel like it's harder to, it's impossible to look away, even though some of the time I wish I could just do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and would you say that it's kind of your responsibility as a writer to do that? And is that something that you feel that writers should be doing, is, using their voices for social change?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I do feel like that it is somebody's right to just write a fun story if they want, and it doesn't have to be about anything else. I don't want to be a puritanical kind of like everybody has their bit to do, like their cross to bear or whatever through art. Like I feel like that's probably limiting, and also potentially like encourages people to kind of force political themes into their work that they maybe aren't necessarily authentically coming up with. I don't know. I think if it's occurring to you, if it's coming up in your work, these things, I think, with certainly my experiences, they just rear their head. You find yourself dealing with them before you've really set out to think about it. That's when it's right to pursue it, I think, and hopefully do it well, hopefully do it in a way that is helpful, rather than just more noise.
Well, I think it's hard. It's probably hard to avoid it to an extent as well. And I suppose maybe the job of the writer is maybe more to facilitate a dialogue around things rather than to, the last thing we want is preachy books, whether it's left wing or right wing, saying this is the way things should be. You want books saying this is the problem, here are some of the solutions, and then it kind of leaves it up to you to then decide what to do about them.
Yeah, I think fiction, fantasy fiction, the less real it is, the more true it needs to be, in a kind of weird paradoxical kind of way. I think if you're preaching and it's kind of quite artificial, people immediately know that, and it's too abstracted, and you lose that connection to the characters, and the story isn't grounded in the way it should be. And I think the realities that affect people is stronger writing when you're dealing with characters that feel recognizable, even if they're often quite outlandish in other ways. Real people experiencing the effects of their world, and that kind of tracks perfectly with whatever kind of political allegories or parallels that you might have included in some work. I think if it's done in a not to necessarily persuade or coerce anybody into changing their mind, but putting forward some of yourself and letting that be part of the, like you said, part of the argument. I think that's a good way of putting it. It's just a point for people to take what they want from it, I suppose.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And just to end on, so what have you got planned next? Let's say that we catch up again in another 3 years or so. What do you hope to have achieved in that kind of intervening time?
Well, let's be optimistic. If I'm currently, it's a little personal aside, I'm waiting for full assessment for ADHD and other stuff, which potentially might lead to my work picking up as well, if I can get my focus together. Here's the optimism. The optimism is in a couple of years, I would really like to have the novel that I've been sitting on and editing very, very slowly out to agents, and hopefully be seeing some kind of traction there. And I would like to have maybe put together a small book of poems as well. I haven't got anything published poetry wise, and I still feel like performance is where I prefer to see my poetry rather than the page, but it is something people keep asking at various poetry events, so I think it'd be worth me trying that too. So maybe 2 books, possibly on the path to being published, or perhaps even published, who knows.
Fingers crossed. Big thank you to author Michael-Israel Jarvis for joining me for this week's catch-up. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Heather Innes with War Scars.
Couldn't understand why we moved around so much, why I had 9 schools in my youth. I was born since that war, so how could I know why you found it so hard to face the truth? Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew. Hoping the grass was greener, you moved our family on, seeking peace beyond each horizon new. You became a traveling salesman to keep those demons at bay until retirement and your dreams you could pursue. Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew. You couldn't share your feelings buried deep within, finding fault, something to blame in each new place. The bright Australian sun, dog poo on the streets, your reasons became more crazy to embrace. Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew. You believed in that war, they said you came home unscathed, but peace was an illusion you couldn't embrace. They were wrong, you lost your life, fighting for their empire, forever running from horrors you had to face. Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew. Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew.
Sitting in the gallery, watching you. 'cause I could see that they don't do the things you do to me. When you're hanging on the wall, the others might as well not be there at all. Though I know you're flawed in parts, to me you're a work of art. When I look into your eyes, it's like looking at the night sky. When I look into your face, it takes me to another place. But the greatest thing by miles is looking at your Mona Lisa smile. Looking at your Mona Lisa smile. I know we've had our ups and downs. I know at times I'm a pain to have around, but our love is strong enough to take the smooth with the rough. I know at times it seems that I don't care, but you're my world and I need you there. And when you give a smile that I adore, I see the timeless beauty that Leonardo saw. When I look into your eyes, it's like looking at the night sky. When I look into your face, it takes me to another place. But the greatest thing by miles is looking at your Mona Lisa. Looking at your Mona Lisa. Looking at your Mona Lisa smile. Looking at your Mona Lisa smile. When I look into your eyes, like looking at the night sky. When I look into your face, it takes me to another place. But the greatest thing by miles is looking at your Mona Lisa. Looking at your Mona Lisa. Looking at your Mona Lisa smile. 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 Looking at your Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa smile.
That was Mona Lisa Smile by Colin Upfield, and before that we had War Scars by Heather Inners. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it is time for us to head over to the Oak Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Ars Longa Vita Brevis by The Nice. Before Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Keith Emerson was a member of The Nice. By the time they recorded this album in 1968, they were mostly performing as a keyboard, bass and drum trio, rather like ELP. The problem was that they did not have a good enough lead singer. The bass player Lee Jackson does most of the singing, though Emerson himself even sings on a couple of tracks, but neither came close to being in the same class as someone like Greg Lake. To me, The Nice were much more interesting, groundbreaking, and even more anarchic than ELP. They released a single of America from West Side Story. It starts with parts of Dvorak's New World Symphony. Then they played a speedy version of the main theme, and then they did variations of it over a typical rock structure. Then they soloed over it with the soloing reaching peaks of sonic chaos with feedback and the banging of the organ against the floor. Then they returned to an even more triumphant version of the theme and a poem. They once burnt an American flag during a performance, which really upset the Americans. It has the sound of protest, yet it is purely instrumental. This structure is one they tended to repeat, using other classical themes to head and tail excursions into psychedelic noise, blues rock Hammond organ soloing, or extended jazz piano improvisations. On this album they follow the same template for their version of the Coralia Suite by Sibelius on side 1. A tune that was made familiar by being used as the theme to a current affairs programme. This was the Nice's second LP. Side 1 also has a couple of novelty songs and some prog rock. Side 2 is supposedly a side-long suite, and as such is quite groundbreaking. It starts off like a piece of 20th century classical music, in the vein of Gershwin's American in Paris. We then get a drum solo. Some of it is rock music, which is probably quite heavy for the time, and some of it is piano improvisation. But the standout movement is their version of Bach's Brandenburg Concerto. It is performed with an orchestra, but it still follows their template for adapting classics. This was used as a theme to a TV art show. The Nice went on to do an even more epic suite with an orchestra, and even noisier cover versions of classical and rock tunes. They probably went as far as they could, but Emerson needed Greg Lake and Carl Palmer to truly go over the top. Ars longa vita brevis, which I think is not real Latin, but schoolboy Latin, meaning life is short but art is long. Ars longa vita brevis by The Nice.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Charles Heathcote and to Michael-Israel Jarvis for their catch-up sessions. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. Thank you for listening. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We are repeating on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also drop me a line if you would like to via email. My email address is dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. I'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is Big Nose Thomas with Pedal Blues. I'll catch you next week.
Often do you hear a pedal o' brave in the deep dark sea? How often do you hear a pedal o' brave in the deep dark sea? Well, as I was coming to find as a woman that doesn't pine over me. Soft and harmless, it makes for the perfect disguise. Well, be soft and harmless, it makes for the perfect disguise. What I'm seen as no competition in their husband's eyes. Of the women's shade, I've got a weird kind of way that puts up the women's shade. I'm no handyman, darling, where they may be sleeping with their men, but it's me running round their head. But you can't say I'm through. All the power's out of my steer. Oh, you can't say I'm through. All the power is out of my steer. And the order I'm purveying is one that men should live to fear. Time and time again, darling, stay with the man you've got. me time and time again, darling, stay with the mind you've got. But they say I want a big no storm this time on my mind.